Did the WNBA sacrifice integrity for control? That's the burning question tonight, as Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White exposes what many are calling the biggest officiating scandal in recent league history. Fans are outraged, players are shaken, and the credibility of the league itself now hangs in the balance. What was supposed to be a Cinderella playoff run for the Fever has turned into a story of alleged manipulation, favoritism, and cover-ups. And at the heart of it all, an explosive claim that referees weren't just bad, but biased. The controversy didn't begin with the first whistle. It began before the ball was even tipped. The Indiana Fever walked into their playoff clash against the Atlanta Dream, missing not one, not two, but 6 critical players. Caitlin Clark, the league's brightest rookie star, sidelined with a groin injury that abruptly ended her historic season. Chloe BBY out with a knee issue. Sophie Cunningham, same story. Sydney Colson, also shelved with knee problems. Ari McDonald battling foot complications. And just a day before the opening tip, Diari Stantis pulled into concussion protocol. The sheer improbability of losing this much firepower at once left fans stunned. Statisticians later pointed out, the odds of such a cluster of injuries hitting a single roster right before the postseason was less than 1%. Too unlikely, too convenient. This wasn't just misfortune, it felt like sabotage, were the Fever being stripped down before they even had a chance to compete. The narrative of the underdog rising against all odds was being rewritten into one of forced collapse. And while injuries are part of the game, the timing here raised eyebrows and suspicions of whether Indiana was being left vulnerable by more than just bad luck. For a brief moment, it looked like Indiana might defy the odds and write a new chapter in WNBA history. Despite being severely shorthanded, the Fever came out of the gates with energy, precision, and purpose. Kelsey Mitchell was locked in, draining early shots from the perimeter, while Aaliyah Boston asserted her dominance in the paint, scoring and rebounding with the authority of a veteran star. Within minutes, Indiana had carved out a 15-6 lead, stunning Atlanta and silencing the home crowd. This was David swinging his stone at Goliath, and for a heartbeat, it looked like the underdog might just land the knockout punch. But then the whistles started, and they weren't just ordinary fouls. These were calls so egregious that even the broadcast commentators couldn't hide their disbelief. Perfect defensive positioning by Lexi Hull against Ryan Howard somehow resulted in a foul on Hull. Elbows flying from Atlanta players went unnoticed, while the lightest brush from an Indiana defender sparked immediate whistles. Brianna Turner, elbowed directly in the face, was somehow ruled. The aggressed fans at home watched replays in disbelief, shaking their heads as clear evidence of Atlanta's physicality was ignored. The tide turned not because Atlanta suddenly found their rhythm, but because the officials systematically pulled Indiana out of there. For a team already hanging on by threads, this wasn't just unfair, it was devastating. Every questionable call chipped away at momentum, silenced their rhythm, and drained their energy. It was as if the referees themselves had become Atlanta's 6th player, ensuring that Indiana's hot start was snuffed out before it could grow into something unstoppable. This wasn't simply poor officiating. It was officiating that directly altered the competitive balance of the game, leaving players, coaches, and fans to wonder whether the Fever were ever meant to win that night. When a coach has to use a challenge early in a playoff game, it's usually a sign of desperation, but for Stephanie White, it wasn't about panic, it was about survival. Just minutes into the first quarter, she was forced to burn her first challenge on a foul call, so blatantly wrong that fans inside the arena booed before she even signaled for review. And when the replay showed Lexi Hull had made a textbook defensive play, the challenge was upheld. One bullet dodged, but one lifeline wasted. The real problem wasn't that she used a challenge. It was that she had to use another one almost immediately after. Again, the replay proved her right. Again, the refs had blown an obvious call. By the time the second quarter rolled around, White had no challenges left, yet had been proven correct 100% of the time. Think about what that means. 2 incorrect calls so clear that even under replay scrutiny, there was no debate. And that was just the start of the game. Without the safety net of challenges, White and the Fever were exposed to whatever whistle came next, no matter how unjustified. From that moment forward, the game tilted dramatically. Atlanta's aggressive style suddenly had no accountability. Indiana's already thin roster was forced to play cautious, afraid of whistles they couldn't contest. White stood helpless on the sidelines, knowing she had been stripped of her only tool to correct officiating error. In a league where coaches are given just 2 challenges per game, she had used them both before halftime, and won them both. That stat alone should have triggered alarms in the league office. But instead of raising questions, it was buried beneath the chaos of the game. The optics were damning. When a coach can prove referees wrong twice and still be left powerless, what does that say about the system in place? For Stephanie White, it said only one thing: that this wasn't just bad officiating. This was a game spiraling into something much darker. If there was one player Atlanta could not contain without help, it was Aaliyah Boston. The reigning Rookie of the Year was dominating early, scoring efficiently, controlling the boards, and setting the tone with her physical presence inside. For a Fever squad already missing 6 contributors, Boston was the engine keeping them alive. And that's precisely why what happened next was so devastating. Midway through the second quarter, Boston was whistled for her 3rd foul on a play that replays showed clearly should have gone the other way. Ryan Howard initiated all of the contact, lowering her shoulder and crashing into Boston's chest. By every definition of basketball rules, that was offensive. Yet the whistle punished Boston instead. Before the Fever could regroup, another whistle came. Her 4th foul before halftime, on a block attempt where she barely touched her opponent. 2 possessions, 2 fouls, and suddenly Indiana's best player was chained to the bench. The effect was immediate and crushing. Atlanta surged as Boston sat, free to attack the paint with little resistance. For Indiana, it wasn't just losing a player. It was losing their anchor, their identity, the one stabilizing force in a chaotic game. Fans watching were outraged. Social media exploded, and even neutral analysts admitted that Boston had been pulled off the court, not by Atlanta's play, but by the referee's whistle. But here's the bigger picture. Targeting a star player through questionable fouls doesn't just hurt a team, it sends a message. It tells players that no matter how well they prepare, no matter how hard they fight, their success can be undone in an instant by forces outside their control. And when that player is Aaliyah Boston, a cornerstone not just for Indiana, but for the WNBA's future, the damage extends beyond one playoff series. It raises doubts about whether the league is protecting its stars or sacrificing them for narrative convenience. What Boston endured that night wasn't competition, it was sabotage dressed as officiating. Stephanie White's frustration didn't come out of nowhere. Her explosion on the sidelines wasn't simply about one game, it was the culmination of months of evidence she had been quietly collecting. According to sources close to the Fever, White had been tracking officiating patterns all season long, and what she uncovered was nothing short of staggering. The data showed Indiana was consistently being called for nearly double the fouls of their opponents in nationally televised games. Not just occasionally, not just in a few matchups. Almost every single time the Fever played under the bright lights, the whistle tilted against them. The numbers painted a picture far too clear to ignore. In games where Indiana was favored to win, foul calls against them spiked by more than 30. In nationally televised games, featuring Caitlin Clark, that number ballooned to over 40%. These aren't the fluctuations of random chance. This is a pattern. And when you pair those numbers with the Fever's constant struggle to keep momentum, a troubling question emerges. Was officiating being used as a lever to control outcomes? Fans didn't need spreadsheets to see. They'd watched Sophie Cunningham get hit with technicals for things other players got away with. They'd seen Kelsey Mitchell throw her hands up in disbelief after phantom fouls stalled her scoring run. And they'd noticed the timing. Every time Indiana started to gain traction, the whistles seemed to follow. It felt orchestrated, like someone behind the curtain didn't want the Fever to become the story of the WNBA. Stephanie White's decision to blow up publicly wasn't about protecting her reputation. It was about putting the spotlight on a trend she believed was sabotaging not just her team, but the integrity of the league itself. Her message was simple. If the officiating isn't fair, then nothing else matters. As if the questionable whistles and statistical patterns weren't enough, What came to light after the Fever's playoff loss ignited an even bigger firestorm, just days before the crucial matchup against Atlanta. Video footage surfaced showing one of the referees assigned to the game casually wearing Atlanta Dream merchandise at a private event. To fans, this wasn't just a bad look, it was damning. How could a referee possibly claim impartiality while sporting the colors of the very team he would be officiating? The WNBA scrambled to contain the fallout, quickly releasing a statement that the referee's appearance was linked to a charity function and carried no bias. But optics matter, and in the world of professional sports, perception is as damaging as reality. If a referee is seen wearing team gear, even under innocent circumstances, it shatters the illusion of neutrality. The very bedrock of fair competition, trust in the officials crumbles. This revelation fueled conspiracy theories that were already simmering. Fans pointed to the disproportionate fouls, the targeting of Aaliyah Boston, and the inexplicable timing of key calls as proof of bias. Now, they had a smoking gun. Even if the league's explanation was technically accurate, it didn't erase the fact that the referee entered the game carrying the stain of favoritism. And in a matchup already mired in controversy, that stain was enough to push outrage into overdrive. Former and current players began whispering about what they had long suspected, that some referee crews carried preferences, and teams often adjusted game plans based not just on opponents, but on which officials were assigned. The trust gap between players and officials, always delicate, now widened into a chasm. And with the Fever's season ending under these circumstances, that chasm became the defining storyline of the playoffs. The question wasn't just whether one referee showed bias, it was whether the WNBA itself was ignoring, or even enabling, a system where favoritism could thrive unchecked. When the final buzzer sounded and the Fever's season came to a crashing halt, the outrage wasn't limited to fans. Inside locker rooms and press conferences, players and coaches began voicing their frustrations, but they had to do so with caution. In the WNBA, criticizing officials too directly doesn't just bring fines, it can jeopardize careers. That's why the most revealing reactions didn't come in bold statements, but in subtle coded language. Kelsey Mitchell, normally reserved, delivered a pointed line in her post-game comments. "It felt like we were playing 5-on-8 out there." On paper, it seemed like a reference to Indiana's depleted roster. But to those paying attention, the meaning was clear. Mitchell wasn't talking about missing teammates. She was talking about the referee. Aaliyah Boston, careful not to cross the league's disciplinary line, phrased it even more delicately. "You just have to learn to adjust to how games are called." To fans, it sounded like a neutral comment, but to her teammates, it was an acknowledgement that the game hadn't been officiated fairly. Stephanie White herself reached a breaking point during the game, erupting on the sidelines and earning a technical foul. But even then, her fury wasn't about one call. It was about a season's worth of accumulating injustice. After the game, though, she too had to dial it back, couching her criticism in generalities about needing consistency. Behind closed doors, however, White was reportedly furious, telling those close to her that the numbers she had tracked spoke for themselves. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate from around the league. Anonymous players confirmed what many had long suspected, that certain officiating crews had reputations for bias, and that game strategies often changed depending on who was wearing the stripe. Complaints filed to the league office, they said, were rarely investigated and sometimes met with fines instead of answers. The message was clear. Players and coaches knew something was wrong, but they were trapped in a system that punished them for speaking the truth. The Fever's plight had become a cautionary tale. In the WNBA, calling out officiating wasn't just risky, it could be career suicide. And yet, even under that shadow, the cracks of dissent were beginning to show. At this point, the debate shifted beyond basketball. Fans and analysts alike began asking a darker, more unsettling question. Was this really about bad refereeing? Or was it about protecting the WNBA's business interests? On the surface, Indiana should have been the league's crown jewel. With Caitlin Clark leading the Fever, attendance records were smashed, television ratings skyrocketed, and merchandise sales soared. By every metric, Clark was a once-in-a-generation phenomenon, the kind of player who could elevate the entire league. And yet, instead of embracing her team's rise, It seemed as though the league was working to hold them back. Why? Sources suggested that behind closed doors, league executives were worried about market balance. If Indiana became too dominant, too fast, it risked overshadowing larger markets the league was desperate to develop. Teams in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The fear wasn't about competition on the court, but competition for attention, sponsorships, and revenue stream. To the league, Clark was valuable, but only as part of a larger story. A runaway Fever dynasty threatened to centralize the spotlight in Indiana, leaving other franchises and their markets struggling to keep up. This theory gained traction because it lined up with what fans saw. Every time the Fever gained momentum, something stopped them cold. Injuries, suspensions, and most glaringly, officiating that defied logic. When analyzed over the course of the season, the data told the same story. Indiana faced disproportionate foul calls in games with the highest stakes, the brightest lights, and the largest audiences. If this was coincidence, it was a cruelly consistent one. The scandal wasn't just about calls made or missed. It was about perception. Fans began to believe the league was less interested in fairness and more interested in controlling its narrative. The Fever, despite being the team that brought millions of new eyes to the sport, seemed to be punished for becoming too successful too quickly. And if that suspicion holds true, then what happened on the court in Atlanta wasn't just poor officiating. It was business dressed up as basketball. When the controversy erupted after Indiana's season-ending loss, the WNBA had a critical opportunity to show transparency, accountability, and respect for its players and fans. Instead, the league doubled down. Rather than reviewing the game tape or addressing the mounting concerns about officiating integrity, league officials issued a cold, dismissive statement, defending the referees and warning teams against making unfounded accusations. No investigation, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the referees spotted in Atlanta Dream gear. Just silence wrapped in corporate PR. But that response didn't calm the storm. It poured gasoline on it. Fans who were already outraged saw the league's words as proof of complicity. Social media exploded, with hashtags like #FeverGotRobbed trending across the country. Compilation videos of questionable calls went viral within hours, each clip serving as another nail in the coffin of the league's credibility. Even neutral fans, people with no stake in Indiana's success, admitted the officiating looked suspiciously one-sided. Some Atlanta supporters even confessed online that their team had benefited from calls that felt indefensible. What the league underestimated was the power of its growing audience. With Caitlin Clark drawing national attention, the WNBA had more eyes on it than ever before. That meant more scrutiny, more replays dissected, and more accountability demanded. By brushing aside the scandal instead of confronting it, the league effectively confirmed the worst fears of fans, that the system was rigged and the leadership had no interest in fixing it. Stephanie White's outburst, once viewed as just a coach's frustration, suddenly looked heroic. Fans rallied around her as the lone figure willing to risk her career to say what everyone else was whispering, that the game wasn't fair and the league wanted it that way. In trying to silence the controversy, the WNBA amplified it, and in doing so, they risked something far greater than one playoff series. They risked the very trust that sustains professional sports. When the dust settled, Indiana's magical season was over. But what lingered wasn't just disappointment. It was doubt. Doubt about the fairness of the game. Doubt about the integrity of the league. Doubt about whether the WNBA values competition, or if it values controlling outcomes more. Fans, players, and analysts began asking the most dangerous question a sports league can face. If the results aren't decided on the court, then what's the point of playing at all? For the Fever, this season should have been remembered as the breakout year of Caitlin Clark's professional journey, the rise of Aaliyah Boston into a household name, and the resilience of a team battling adversity. Instead, it will be remembered for blown whistles, phantom fouls, and a coaching staff that felt forced to fight not just opponents, but referees too. White's technical foul symbolized that struggle. It wasn't about one bad call. It was about an entire system that seemed stacked against her team from the opening tip. The implications stretch beyond Indiana. If certain refs are known for biases, If teams adjust strategies based on who's officiating, and if players are afraid to speak out for fear of fines or retaliation, then the WNBA faces a credibility crisis. No league can thrive if its athletes and fans believe the competition isn't legitimate. And now, with Caitlin Clark bringing unprecedented attention to the sport, the stakes are higher than ever. The WNBA had a golden opportunity to showcase fairness, drama, and authentic competition. Instead, they've planted seeds of suspicion that could drive new fans away as quickly as they arrived. The Fever may never know what they could have accomplished with a healthy roster and fair officiating. That is the true tragedy. They proved they could fight, they proved they could compete, and yet they were denied the chance to prove how far they could go. What's left is a haunting reality. If the league doesn't confront this scandal head-on, it risks losing not just Indiana's trust, but the trust of everyone watching. And once integrity is lost, it's nearly impossible to get it back.